Welcome back. I'm Dr. Tombley, and this is another session of employee training. This session is all about our therapeutic philosophy and our therapeutic approach. Our model involves biology, psychology, social elements, and spiritual development. These are the four components of a human being's experience. So let's get started. We're going to start off with how we organize our life at the ranch, which in behavioral health terms are called congregant living. For congregant living, we use Milieu therapy. Milieu therapy combines uh, the efforts of individuals, social structures, consequences and rewards, all with the idea of preventing self-destructive behavior. In fact, not just preventing self-destructive behavior, but actually developing constructive behavior. At MRCA, we have three components. First is that structured character and confidence building that we do. This is done through life skills trainers and educators and craftsmen and mentors, parent liaisons and case managers, and everyone that a student interacts with. They're continually striving to develop these character qualities or characteristics and develop a sense of confidence in themselves. Alongside of this, we add elements of spiritual formation, uh, mentorships, and other relationships that are formed that really touch a deep part of a student's life. And then we add in some professional counseling with licensed professional counselors, with professional addiction counselors, with individual therapy or group therapies. All of these are combined together in a routine or a rhythm of congregant living that we call Milieu therapy. Let's talk a little bit more about it. Milieu therapy is a safe, structured group treatment method for mental health issues. It involves using everyday activities and a conditioned environment to help people with interaction in a community setting. So they're learning as they're going. What they're learning, they are practicing. And everything that they do, from meal times to hygiene to recreation, everything is part of the transformation. Milieu therapy is a flexible treatment. It allows us to work together with other treatment models without there being a sense of conflict, and it gives tons of hands-on experience. Milieu therapy is based on the ideology of ethos, or group or guiding principles. So students learn to reshape their problematic behavior with a bent toward the guiding principles that are being elevated and practiced or lived out within the community setting. So shaping values doesn't become just the job of the individual. So they're not just making their personal progression through the program, but there's a collective responsibility that everyone should be engaging in these set of principles. This is reflected in everything from the ranking system, having Bergs give push-ups for accountability, uh, for sometimes there being all these large group activities or large group functions where everyone has to work in unison or in cooperation. All this is about reinforcing these guiding principles both individually and corporately. These principles are primarily identified um, through two major sources. First is through Scripture. So there's a set of biblical truths that are repeatedly used to guide counsel and instruction and the measuring rod for behaviors. These have often been condensed and added to conventional wisdom and put into what we call the 100 counsel cards. And so biblical truth and counsel cards are the guiding principles or the ethos of MRCA. And we expect people to memorize them. We expect them to practice them as an individual, but we also navigate these things corporately. Council cards are navigated corporately, but sometimes by public recitation of them, by constantly making choices both for the collective and for individuals based on the wisdom of those cards or biblical truths. Biblical truths are shared through confessions of faith, through the practices of worship, and the teaching of the Bible. Milieu therapy brings with it the power of the community setting. Obviously, these boys are being brought into an environment where they're living with a lot more people than they would be living with if they were in just a small single family unit. We're leveraging the power of community in order to try to encourage behavioral change. So the benefit of that is that you have the pressure of communal living, the pressure of a communal conformity, as well as the fact that you're constantly being able to practice what you're learning. So there's this continual opportunity to mimic in daily casual interactions a truth that you're learning. For example, a student that's learning to be honest, maybe sitting in a one-on-one therapy session or a counseling session with the parent liaison or with LST about dishonest or a lack of honesty in being forthright. They're corrected. They have this great kind of moment where they get it, and then they have an opportunity to constantly be practicing it in all kinds of casual relationships. In fact, we should look for feedback opportunities to students that encourages them not just to correct what they already have done, but to shape what they're going to do next in the next hour or the next 2 hours or the next day. So the community setting is this constant laboratory of change where we learn and apply, learn and apply, learn and apply. The idea is that daily interactions have a clinical impact on you. Eventually, you spread the developed personal values to society. So you're getting better, your family's getting better, and your society gets better. These daily interactions, we consider all of them to have a therapeutic or clinical impact, and we're looking for them to do that. When you join our team, you are part of that clinical team. You may or may not have some professional license or degree, but it doesn't really matter. Your role is on a clinical team that is constantly working to transform a student's behavior. In Milieu therapy, you have the power of immediate impact. As a therapist, I often deal with clients that come to me with behavioral issues. Well, when they come to me for 1 hour a week, they're really well behaved. I'm not dealing with them when they're in a stress situation or they've woken up in a bad mood or they just got corrected. In Milieu therapy, we have a congregant setting where we can give immediate feedback to the types of behaviors that we might log and say, wow, we got to work on this issue. We have the opportunity to respond and to point out and to really help the student open their eyes to what's going on and how they might be able to do something different. When there's a gap of time between an event or a behavior and discussing the behavior, sometimes that can be beneficial if the student's allowed to think through and calm down, but it's also a time where the denial patterns and the rationalization patterns that a student has can distort their interpretation of the events. Therefore, when we try to apply a principle or a virtue or a truth, they're unable to do that because they've so distorted their interpretation of it. In Milieu therapy, congregant living, like in MRCA, you can give immediate feedback to what's going on. So we create, as best we can, a non-threatening surrounding where they can get comfortable enough to be themselves. Around here, we call that really learning who they are. They're able to freely express themselves so they can be who they are. We don't want, if they don't believe in Jesus, we don't want them to pretend they believe in Jesus. If they're mad at their parents, we don't want to pretend that they're not mad at their parents. So we encourage a freedom of authentic, respectful expression. They socialize with us, everyone that's part of the team. Sometimes we're eating together, sometimes we're playing together, sometimes we're cleaning together or working together. This constant interaction in all kinds of contextual environments gives us an opportunity to say, that was done well, or that's what I'm talking about when I say you push back when you don't need to push back. Um, you have these moments where the treatment goals of a student can be touched on in real time. And that real time allows for positive impact that really can be kind of transforming. As we give that positive feedback and that consequence and correction that's immediate, we help the students shape their values. And as their values are shaped, so are their social behaviors shaped. People behave based on what they think is important. Now, if you ask a student that's 14 or 15-year-olds, what are your values that are shaping that bad social behavior, they may or may not be able to understand enough or conceptualize enough what's driving them subconsciously. However, that's what we get to do. We get to elevate the value that's being expressed in a negative behavior and elevate the value when they do it right and it's being expressed in a positive behavior. So it's like we're always lifting up the hood and looking underneath what's motivating a behavior and say, see, you express kindness, or you put others in front of yourself, or you practice the counsel card uh, of the day. So you're able to kind of give that feedback that shapes values and then that shapes behavior. Blue therapy has 5 components, and you will see them built in throughout the program. So they're almost like 5 key values that we have to do, things that we need to constantly be expressing. The first one is support. We give support to students by giving them a time to adapt. The ranking system, for example, is about adapting. They have different expectations at each level of their rank. An orange rank is expected to learn the rules. They're not expected to be happy. They're not expected to be trusted. They're just expected to learn the rules. And so as they learn the rules, then they move up to the yellow rank. As they rank up to yellow, they have another set of expectations. These clearly articulated expectations and freedoms at each of these levels allows the students to adapt over time to the congregant living and to the whole behavioral change process. Also, being supportive means that we maintain relationship and we have grace for them in that relationship. We're getting to know them. So if we're supportive, we allow them to adapt. We give them grace. When they fail, we give consequences, and then we push delete and we move on. And we maintain a sense of relationship. Uh, Almost everything is going to be built out of the sense of relationship that you're going to build with students. The second principle is structure. That means that we should be very, very, very predictable. Um, and you might hear, working here a while, some of the old style, the whole philosophy was they didn't tell students a lot of what was going on because honestly, they would use some of that information to be manipulative. However, we've transitioned away from that and we want to be predictable, extremely predictable. This is consistent with dealing with students that have reactive attachment disorder, have ADHD issues, maybe on the autism spectrum, even in a minor way, have emotional dysregulation, I pretty much have included all of the population that we serve. They need predictability. Without predictability, they're unable to regulate their own set of emotions. So we want to have a lot of structure. We tell them what we're going to do, and we do what we're going to tell them. We do it with consistency. They know they're going to get up, and they know that this is going to happen, then this, and then this, and then this. So we give them a lot of preparation ahead of time about what's happening. So predictability is pivotal to Malou therapy. There should be clear expectations in the structure as well. Again, I'll point to the ranking system and the requirements, some of the standardization of consequence. We do want to have an individualized approach. However, we want to do it within a community or a congregant setting that has good structure. The next principle is validation. This is when we are saying, yes, you are unhappy, or yes, you want to go home, or yes, it's hard to live with 45 other students. We are validating what they're feeling. We're helping them stay safe and find out how do they feel safe in this environment. What do they need to do so that they feel safer in this environment? Okay. And we again urge authenticity. Where are they in this process of change? And being able to acknowledge it with them so that we're moving out of some of the game playing and living in a facade, behind a facade that was used in manipulation prior to them coming here. A fourth principle is involvement. We work alongside students. You'll see the program is designed that way. Uh, Field crews are not just about getting tasks done. Field crews are about having experiences and utilizing this principle of involvement. Sometimes you just need time out there. You need time mowing or fixing fence or putting up sheetrock or working on a building project or repairing a piece of equipment. This is all about involvement. We are looking for opportunities. It's the reason why we are rants and not just a program. We do deliberately look for building projects to do. We want to be involved. That involvement, that working alongside, develops the relationship and gives the social context for children to begin to express positive behaviors. And it equips them not just for employment as adults, but for them to be able to move to different social settings and repeat positive behavior. Because if you can only have a positive behavior in one context, let's say, for example, when you're playing organized basketball, but you can't do it when you are doing chores, then your positive behavior is fragile and limited and not very effective. You want them to be able to take these behaviors into multiple contexts and they learn alongside people. I think there's a lot of dignity too in this sense of involvement that we work together on something. The fifth one and final one is containment. They're going to be here 12 to 15 months, living in a controlled, limited, very, very boundaried setting that is not real life. And real life has far more external influences. So we're removing certain music and certain media, internet access, dating relationships. We're removing all this. This is a very contained environment so that they can focus on whatever their core behaviors. We have enough variability in it to give that context for change. However, this containment allows us to minimize distractions that don't work in the change process. So support, structure, validation, involvement, and containment. All of these principles go into our decision making about how we make our schedules, how we organize our groups, what are our emphasis and our focus, how do we do school. All of this is involved in Malou therapy. So Malou therapy and other therapies are built upon how you understand the human experience. We talk about and conceptualize the human experience as a biopsychosocial spiritual framework, meaning that the human being experiences everything in life through these four domains. And from a biblical point of view, we understand that they're really, even though we're talking about these four separately, they actually are inseparable. They interact with one another in such fine complex um, ways that they're really not even able to be separated. Let me give you an example. When you have a depressed mood because of something you've experienced, the loss of someone, for example. So someone dies and you feel sad. That psychological social experience, okay, that has spiritual kind of connotations to it, affects your body by a decrease in serotonin levels. So you're seeing that you have a thought processes through a social experience that is driven by spiritual values affecting the chemistry in your brain. So any given behavior has a dimension of it that's being experienced on all four of these levels. So everything we do when we think about how do we help a student get better, we don't need to focus solely on one domain. When you focus on one domain at the expense of others, then what you're doing is you are limiting your ability for that student to grasp what's going on and put it into their whole person and then actually have a different behavior or a different experience. Okay, so you're going to see elements of our program that are intentionally driven by these four domains. Let's take a few minutes and look at each one of them. First, first is the biological domain. In our bodies, we have a number of systems that are designed that affect behavior directly. Other systems affect behavior indirectly, but let's talk about the ones that affect behavior directly. There's the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. The sympathetic system is the system that causes you to be alert. It impacts survivability. It allows you to meet challenges and overcome obstacles. It is the fight or flight mechanism. All that is a core brain or a base brain activity of chemical reactions that changes our behavior. The parasympathetic system is a system that allows us to calm ourselves down. It lowers our heart rate, stops the production of adrenaline. It moves blood flow from the center of our brain to our prefrontal cortex, where we do our executive function, our decision making. This this parasympathetic system allows you to calm down. So, for example, people that struggle with anxiety have an overactive sympathetic system or a poorly developed parasympathetic system. And so they're always experiencing elevated sense of anxiety in their body because these systems are not working well, right? So a student's behavior could be impacted by both of these biological symptoms. Now, the solution is not a pill. The solution is a rebooting or an improvement of the biological condition or the biological health of a child. Another system is the neurochemistry that affects mood, impulsivity, and decision making. There are certain neurochemicals, dopamine being a primary one, that directly impacts all three of these: mood, impulsivity, and decision making. Uh, Dopamine is a reinforcer that releases a sense of well-being. When it's experienced, when you have a sense of well-being, you make better decisions, you have a more stable mood, and consequently, you move through problem solving in a um, different way. Neurochemistry is affected by substances that you may have taken or the student may have taken, by the environment, um, and by their thought processes. So we want, again, we see behavior that's connected to biology. Um, and things continue. When people have allergies or they're sick, it changes mood and behavior if they're taking medications, and even all the way to sedentary lifestyles where they're used to just sitting around and they're not doing much. So their body isn't used to purging itself of toxins. Or they have digestive issues. Over 50% of neurotransmitters are processed in the gut. So if you have a student that has all kinds of digestive issues, they're hampering the process of the brain. So biology is a focus when we're trying to change behavior. What are some ways we do that? Well, one of the primary ways is through PT or physical training. Contrary to some people's belief, PT isn't about working their energy out. It's not just about tiring them. It's not about punishing them or inflicting some kind of pain on them and hoping they would change. Physical training is about rebooting the body and the brain. So many of the students that come our way are students that have consumed hours and hours of digital media. They've taken substances. They've slept erratically. They've had all these aggressions. Maybe they've been heavily medicated in various ways, some positive, some not positive, but it's taken a toll on their body. Some students just are lazy or very inactive. They have a lifestyle that um, is not utilizing all of the capacities that their biological systems give them for good behaviors. So the PT is about activating their body. Um, the other thing is, especially for boys, the connection with their physical body is a key element in their understanding of themselves. Confidence comes not necessarily in their beauty, at least that's not what we want to try to persuade, but we want them to have confidence in their body. Can they make their body do what their body needs to do? Can their body meet challenges that need to be met? These are kind of core concepts in survivability, specifically among males. Um, Females will connect with biological functions that are more distinctly connected to femininity, like child rearing or the ability to raise children. But in males, it's often the actual strength of just their muscle structure. So PT is pivotal. Meal plans are monitored and are watched, and we work through meal planning with the idea of high calorie counts to meet the high physical demands, balanced meals and nutrition, um, uh, getting them away from non-digital recreation, getting them to do recreation that's outside of digital consumption, because digital consumption exercises a narrow band of the brain. Um, and the idea that they can regulate. The more exercise that someone does, the better they are at regulating their body systems or actually engaging it intentionally. And then, of course, part of the biological changing in behavior is being able to control your body. For example, can you control your hands and your eyes and your mouth? Someone who's worked in this industry for a long time told a bunch of parents at one point, um, we cannot speak to your child's heart until he learns to control his hands, his eyes, and his mouth. And so, again, behavior change means we're addressing biological elements. Now let's turn our attention to the psychological domain. This is the domain that has to deal with thoughts and feelings. So our brain is an organ, just like our heart or our liver or our lungs. However, the brain is the seat of our mind. Um, our mind are our thoughts, our memories, our emotions, and our values. Our decision making comes directly from our mind, which is again seated in the brain. When we talk about the physical component, we talk about making the brain healthy, the actual organ. When we talk about psychological components, we're talking about making the mind healthy. So our mind or our thinking shapes actually give shape to the physiology or the biology of the brain, which is quite interesting. So you can have thought processes, and based on those thought processes, your neurons organize themselves, and you begin to actually change the shape of your brain by your thoughts. So you've heard the old phrase, "You are what you eat." I would say you are what you think. And if you think something long enough, it actually creates a physical pathway or a physical manifestation of those thoughts. Again, another way of pointing to the fact that these domains are inseparable. Okay, let me give you an example of how this is played out. There was a study where two groups of students were given piano lessons. And one group of students actually got to practice on the piano. The other group of students practiced in their head. They just did it mentally. And when they came to the end of their designated number of practice sessions, they then they had a recital. And what they discovered is the students that learned by just imagining did as well as the ones who had actually touched the piano. So the practicing of the mind in their mind actually changed what they were doing. It reinforced, it built the neural networks, it built the skill to do it. So envisioning or imagining things in a controlled manner with intentionality actually does some of the exact same things that actually practicing it is. So we practice what we do and how we think. And this is one of the reasons why I'm always telling students that what you think is what you will do. What you think about is what you will do. So work on what you're thinking about. Control your thinking, because out of your thinking will come your behavior. Okay. There's been other research, for example, on good words and bad words. There are two processes that the brain goes through called pruning, where neural connections are cut, and branching, where neural connections are created. So when in this research, when they mapped with imaging, the branching or the increasing of neural connections when positive or good words were heard or spoken, and the pruning when there were bad words or negative words heard or spoken. So the conclusion of this is, if you think good thoughts, you're going to be smarter. Well, you'll at least have more neural networks. So positive reinforcement and positive statements have a greater impact on the actual development of the brain, therefore the capacity to think well, than negative. That doesn't mean we don't ever speak the negative. Sometimes we have to, because there's some pruning that needs to be done. They need to challenge some old neural networks. But however, most of our stuff should be positive, and we should teach them to think positively about themselves and to speak positively about themselves and others, because that change in thinking also changes the actual organ of the brain. Another thing is, how you think is how you will feel. Feelings typically, not always, but more often than not, follow belief patterns. And especially the older you get. In early childhood, feelings follow experience, because conceptualization is limited at that age. But by the time they become teenagers, their capacity to conceptualize and to believe something is the thing that then affects their behavior or their emotions. Uh, so, for example, if a girl goes to school and her best friend walks past her with a blank look on her face, that girl then might believe that her friend is mad at her, then she's depressed throughout the day, she's worried and anxious. Um, Maybe only to find out later that that friend had just gotten a piece of bad news and didn't even notice her, because she was so caught up in response to her thoughts about the piece of bad news that she had gotten. And she was in a hurry to pack her stuff because her parents were coming to pick her up. But in this scenario, you see that how someone thinks changes or drives how they feel. So when we work on the thinking pattern of a student, when we try to say, What do you believe to be true? What do you believe to be good? What do you believe about yourself? Um, those thoughts can impact how they feel, and how they feel, angry, mad, upset, glad, whatever, then impacts how they choose to behave. So we're like going to the root, in other words, of some emotions and some behaviors by working with thinking. In Milieu therapy, remember, we're trying to get a bunch of guiding principles that the individual uses and that the community uses. Those guiding principles all are thoughts. Principles are beliefs, basically, and thoughts that kind of permeate and become the framework for everything that we do and how we interpret the world and how we choose. So we really focus on what is somebody thinking, what is a student, what's going on in their mind. Another component of the psychological of cognitive abilities is the sense or the idea of conscience. This is a place like a vault of deposited truths that the student can access. And so they become this reservoir of beliefs or realities that are stored there, and they compare their current experience of life to that something in that reservoir or in that vault of deposited truths. And if those deposited truths are all negative, um, then what happens is they interpret everything negative. The conscience should do two things. It should tell you, uh, cause you to feel guilt when you do something wrong, but it should also cause you to feel pride and confidence when you do something right. And so many of our students have a distorted conscience, whether the conscience is seared um, because trauma has happened, or maybe they have been neglected. There are not a lot of deposits made into their conscience, and so they don't have a lot of guiding principles or truths, or the only ones that have been put in there are negative. So they're constantly evaluating themselves, and never have a sense of self-confidence or of a sense of empowerment. So they're grasping at violence in order to feel powerful. So the development of the conscience is a key piece of the psychological work that we want to do. And lastly is emotional intelligence. This is your ability to move freely as an autonomous or independent person through your own emotional experiences and the emotional experiences of other people. When I can sit in a meeting and a parent, say for example, is really angry, but I don't also have to be angry. I just realize that they're angry. Um, I have a higher level of emotional intelligence than someone who becomes angry because everybody around them is angry. When emotion is only mimicked, then there's a low level of emotional intelligence. And so a lot of times I hear people say, well, they made me mad, or they made me this, or they made me that. When someone sincerely believes that their emotional responses are dictated by other people, that's a low emotional intelligence. As we elevate the emotional intelligence of students, we let them know that there's a lot of ways to talk about emotion. There's a lot of nuances and ways to be more deliberate and precise about emotion, our own emotions and others, and that our emotions can function separate from other people's emotions. Uh, I'll have to say that again. Our emotions can function separate than other people's emotions. This is going to be a challenge for you as an employee, all right? Because you're going to go into an environment where people's emotions are going to be escalated. And I mean people, I mean students, maybe another staff members are escalated. Um, and you're going to feel the urges to match their emotional state. They're all agitated, you're going to be agitated. They're forceful, you're going to be forceful. Um, you want to exercise your own emotional intelligence by being able to be very consciously aware that your emotional state and their emotional state are two different things and therefore can be different even in the same moment. So it's an important concept to learn that often is missed. So let's move to the spiritual domain and talk a little bit about that. What is the spiritual domain in a human being's experience? So the spiritual domain is the seat of values. It's where we have our dreams, our hopes, our desire. Um, it's where we connect with God. Uh, it's our ability to see something greater than ourselves. Um, it is in the spiritual domain that we have a sense, I find a sense of guidance. It's actually where a sense of comfort comes that is bigger than the current context that we're in. Uh, Perseverance, fortitude, strength comes out of the spiritual domain. Holiness, um, uh, being like God, being created in the image of God and being like unto God, being good, and our sense of values. What's important? What do we hold as meaningful in our lives? So, meaning and everything associated with meaning really comes under this idea of the spiritual domain. Uh, when our spiritual domain is healthy, we have a strong ability to connect to the transcendent or to the divine, to God, to our Creator. Um, it's our ability not just to make connection, but to know God, to interact with Him. In fact, that's why we were created. We were created to know and to relate to God in a loving relationship. Many people think we're created to be good, we're created to tell people about Jesus, and some of these things might be things that even God wants us to do, but it isn't the reason why we exist. Humanity exists to be in a love relationship with God, created above all other creation. Um, we were designed to relate to God first and foremost. Even our understanding of relating to one another or relating in a social setting uh, is about relating to our Creator. So this intimate connection. So the spiritual domain um, has to do with this ability to connect to the transcendent. Um, we're stronger when we are in relationship with God. That connection. So our spiritual strength comes from our connectivity. I think it's okay and true that we say, look, our spiritual strength comes from maybe our understanding of our values or of our intrinsic value when we are allowed to dream and we're allowed to have hope and we're allowed to imagine. That's all true. But more than anything, that connection with God makes all those other elements really kind of expand in the student. Um, the other key principle that comes in the spiritual domain is the ability to surrender. And this ability to yield profoundly affects behavior um, and, uh, and is a necessary skill to develop. Without surrender, we will become self-destructive. Um, and unfortunately, and that's a distinctly spiritual domain function. So we work on the spiritual domain by our engagement with church services, the elements in chapel, the daily devotions, encouraging people students to consider salvation, spiritual disciplines like prayer, engagement in mission projects, and the spiritual emphasis that we fold into the calendar all year long. Okay, the last domain is the social domain. This is where we interact with peers um, and family members, our ability to follow and work with others. So we were created, I said earlier, to be in relationship with God, but also to be in relationship with one another. Um, the social component of the human experience is undeniable. That's why when we see someone isolating, we say that this is negative or it's unhealthy. We see, in fact, the worst thing you can do to someone is put them in isolation. Um, it will have a negative impact on all other domains of the human experience. So without relationships, basically we go insane. Relationships have profound impacts on our decision making. If I would to point out to a silly one that is extremely obvious with adolescents is when they get infatuated with someone. They start making decisions in all kinds of different manner than they were making they would make before they were infatuated. Um, but how we relate to mom and dad, how we relate to our peers, to teachers, to coworkers, to employers, all the content and the nature or the importance or the health of those relationships shape our decision making. Uh, our relationships also serve as a mirror to how we see ourselves. So if a student has disrupted relationships in his family of origin, mom or dad, especially let's say an adopted student who immediately feels discarded by his biological parents, those relationships are like a mirror. They look into those relationships and then they see themselves. So they measure themselves through these relationships. Even relationships that they're going to tell you they hate and don't want, those relationships are still functioning as a mirror. So if we want a student to be self-confident, we want a student to be healthy and make good decisions, he or she has got to develop healthy relationships. So anything that's hindering relationship is going to hinder behavior. So like we really will emphasize the idea that they need to apologize, they need to be honest with parents, they need to restore a relationship with their parents. Why is that? Because that's such a primary mirror for how they understand themselves. And if they hate their parents, they will hate themselves. If they hate their teachers, they will hate themselves. If they hate their peers, they will hate themselves. Relationship. So healthy social relationships are pivotal. And we design elements in our program to move toward that. Um, some of it is to moderate some negative components that typically come in congregate setting. For example, the pecking order, a dominant structure. So we try to mitigate that some by actually having a ranking structure that we control. And so we are more purposeful with it so that it doesn't just happen organically. If it happens organically, it'll just be who's the biggest bully in the room. And so we manipulate that pecking order or that dominant structure so that it is value driven rather than simply power driven. Right? We talk about the impact of peer pressure. We insist that they learn to hold one another accountable. Um, and these types of relational and social interactions. They have to make amends. They have to forgive. They have to uh, understand the sense of justice. They have to be willing to um, uh, put things behind them, to reconcile, to establish boundaries with one another. All of these social skills and all these pro-social behaviors are important to how the student sees themselves and how they're going to behave for the rest of their life. So there's all kinds of pieces in our program that are designed specifically with impacting the social domain. So we put all that together. Um, Again, we have the overarching clinical approach of Malou therapy, uh, driving us to create a contained, confined structure that is predictable, that has clear expectations, and is built upon a progressive adaptation to change. It involves structured character and confidence building that is lived out in social settings, working alongside people by every single member of the staff. So no matter what level you work in, you have a clinical value in Malou therapy. You're able to give that immediate feedback right in the midst of the experience. Um, you're able to see the student for who they are, and you can build a relationship and become a new mirror for them to begin to see themselves. Then we have pastors and mentors, certain spiritual events that are designed to highlight and really hone in and supercharge some of these domains and these components, values, conscience, etc. And then we have professional counselors that uh, they target specific areas of growth and areas of change, and they use a high skill level in order to begin to target that. A good example is dealing with trauma, okay, or dealing with areas of sexuality. All these come together, these three gears, and And in this illustration, you can see the biggest gear is the everyday life. Um, the Master's Ranch program isn't designed to recreate family or to give a sense of family that a student is lacking. It's designed to remediate a student, to put them in a laboratory or a confined environment where every day their behavior is being shaped so that they can go home to a family. And so if you are working as a life skill trainer, or even if you're working as support staff or kitchen staff, or you're a teacher, um, you're a tradesman, you are doing something very important by living this daily structure out. I want you to know how intentional it is. Everything has a why to it. Some of you you're doing something more concentrated. You're a parent liaison or a family liaison, or you're doing pastoral care or a mixture of pastoral care and house parenting maybe or something like that. Again, they have less contact with you, but they have very significant contact with you. And then last but not least, you might be one of the professional counselors. Again, you have the least amount of contact, but your role is important as well. Thank you so much for your time. We're going to turn off the video and allow you to have some discussion regarding our therapeutic approach and answer any of your questions.